I used to have I did a radio talk show in college, dishing it out 103.3 KFCU.
Nice.
So like I would kind of the same kind of banter where I would just like get on, the FM radio, have really no script, but bring on some guests and, just kind of like banter and just talk about whatever, maybe have like one topic of the day or like a current event or, maybe talk about music or, kind of just have callers, phone in or whatever. But yeah, no, it was a good time. So I'm glad to be back on the podcast wave.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it sounds great. I always like podcasts, obviously, are pretty popular now, but it's interesting when you hear people who are doing, whether it was like a podcast or something like a radio show, anything like sort of in the audio, somewhat longer form, uh,
Yeah,
like sort of medium is kind of interesting because that's obviously like, uh, become huge in the last several years or decade or whatever. But even really a few years, probably it's a lot more popular than it was a few years
yeah,
prior.
yeah.
And people who were doing it back then, it's like, that's pretty OG.
It was like what was the? I feel like the podcast boom was huge in like between like 2015 and 2019. I feel like it really started to like grow exponentially with like what started with like Apple Podcasts, which was like pretty shitty. I feel like no one really uses it
Still,
anymore.
still is.
But yeah, no, Spotify came along. I would release mine on SoundCloud. And I just had to go back recently and get like the SoundCloud premium again because half of the episodes were locked up. They kind of hold your content in custody as if you're not paying for the SoundCloud premium or
Right.
whatever. But yeah, no, just kind of did like the converter to re-download that. Um, but yeah, no, it's interesting. I feel like there'd be I know there's Pods Media. That kind of sounds. I haven't really explored it that much. I've listened to a couple podcasts on it, but that seems like a cool kind of blockchain esque technology. I think they release them as like NFTs or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean it's cool to see how the space has grown a lot, and I mean everyone loves to chat. So
Yeah, no, definitely. I think yeah, Pods.media, I'm very familiar. I am friendly with Lucas, who's the founder over there, and we release these episodes on there and also
oh
my main
nice.
podcast I've been doing for a while on there. And it's interesting. I'm not sure I launched my first personal like podcast NFT in I think it was 2021. At the time, it was like the first one ever, as far as I was aware, and it was with Alex Mazmej was the guest, and he was like, leaning in hard on all of these on-chain things. He had like made a coin, a personal token, well before anyone was really doing any of that, like Alex Coin or whatever it was, and
Oh
so
yeah.
I was like, this is a great guest to experiment with this podcast NFT, and we put it out on Zora. It was like 50 minutes or whatever, and then years later, I guess Lucas was at Bankless and was trying to get them to do, to post their podcasts as NFTs, and they were like
Uh-huh.
kind of lukewarm on it. So he went and built the thing, and it's really cool. I don't. It's like NFTs as a category is kind of interesting because I think there's people who collect different sort of NFTs for a lot of like different reasons, and
Hmm.
accordingly, some of them it makes sense to have be like some of these you have a CryptoPunk or like a Fidenza or any of these like Grail things. Like it makes sense that they have these like crazy price tags. At least it does to me. But
Yeah.
then you have like something like a podcast NFT, and like if there's a bunch of them, whether it's constrained by time or a certain number of editions per podcast or whatever the constraint might be, like there's going to be a lot of podcast episodes. Like there can kind of be as many as the content creator creates over time, and like it doesn't make sense to me personally that those would become like super valuable, and even probably the default price on them when you set them to like free, it still has like sort of a charge of, I don't know what it is exactly, like $2 or $3. And I'm like, even that is like almost too much. Like
Hmm.
if someone's gonna like
Yeah.
they should just be able to like collect them for like gas, and then if the podcaster wants to charge, they can, but obviously that doesn't really monetize for pods, so I get it. But anyway, it's just like I think those like collecting my podcast is more so a thing of like a timestamp of like, hey,
Hmm.
I was here listening to this like in 2021 when or 20, I wasn't releasing on pods back then. It didn't exist, but I was releasing, I was listening on 2023, and like I have collected all the episodes since, and like it's just sort of like a cool bragging rights thing and like a way to support the podcaster a little bit, but it's not like,
Totally.
that, and also like music, like all of these things I think kind of need to like find their lanes within the NFT space. And it's not
Hmm.
totally obvious like where each lands, but it seems that like, when we had, I forget what it was, but last cycle there was like some music NFTs that were going for like hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And it's like, I get it. If it's the first one, like fine. But
Hmm.
beyond that, it's like these things should have like somewhat reasonable price tags, like how you used to pay, 99 cents for a song on iTunes. And even that now you pay, $10 a month for Spotify streaming or whatever. So it's like, I get it. Like there's better business models, I think, and there's ways to like better support the artists that they can get paid more than they do by like Spotify. But it's tough. Like,
Hmm.
it shouldn't be like super expensive just to like, collect podcasts, collect music, whatever.
Totally. It should be like adding it to your library, right? Where it's
Exactly.
like, I can go back and easily like shuffle my songs or listen to a podcast that I collected years ago just for that nostalgia and be like, yeah, this is provenance here. Like I was an early listener. You can see it in my account here. And it's like different where it's like art, right? Where it's like it's not like a pudgy penguin where it's like, rarity is huge. You don't have like a golden figure that's very speculative. And I feel like it's like like even like there's like sports highlights like with Top Shot or where it's like LeBron just dunking in a finals game where it's like, oh yeah, like this should be worth I feel like the speculative markets weren't super adaptive to it,
Right.
and they didn't really kind of take it over, which was super interesting. Maybe it's because it's just like it wasn't enough like liquidity in the market, or too early to tell. But I think it's like, that ability to really just like put the provenance on chain and have the ability to like go back and look at it, I think is super, super valuable, at least like in the long term. I think right now it's all about the attention, right? Like what's making the headlines, what's making people money. And right now it's like the podcast and music aren't quite there yet, but the ability to like own these assets, I think one day will be kind of rediscovered again. But I guess it's just gonna kind of wait for the right. I don't know if it's like on the app layer where it's a Spotify competitor that comes in and is like, hey, look at this sleek UX mobile app. You can have all your basically be like a wallet, I would imagine, or something where you sign in and you can really just like ingest this media. I would assume it'd have to be kind of more immersive. I think it starts with audio probably, but then video, right? Where like you're not like your the Netflix thing or 9.99 a month for Spotify. But I think that's like one of the biggest robberies, I think, in my opinion, is renting cloud storage or like access to a library where you don't actually, even if you buy it on Apple or whatever, Amazon Prime, the video you're not guaranteed access to it for the rest of your life.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if all of these sort of forms of media go direct, whether that's in parallel to these alternative like streaming platforms that offer, the rentals, even though, I think I'm understanding what you're saying correctly. Like, even if you technically buy it on Amazon Prime or Apple, like it's, it's not
Yeah,
decentralized, so they can sort of pull the plug whenever they want.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, it'd be interesting if there's like more direct ownership enabled with movies, TV, music, podcasts,
Mhm.
all these things.
Or even
Um,
like self-custody too, I think is huge, where I think at least for example, right, where like my girlfriend, she had all of her photos on the Google Cloud, right? And as soon as it was like on like her college education account, and then when the school was like, all right, we're not paying for the storage anymore, all of the past whatever 5 years or so, all of that data was just wiped. And kind of just like not realizing that it's not fully, if you don't have the assets or files on your hard drive somewhere where you can easily just access it, it's like just being cut off. And yeah, I feel like is something that like it's gonna take one massive event that happens, like where everyone kind of like loses this. Hopefully it doesn't happen, of course, but I feel like that would be like one of the catalysts that would make, self custody super, super important to people.
Yeah, a big hack that exposes the issues of centralization, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't
Like
happen, like you said. But I mean, people have these personal examples. Like that's a pretty brutal one. You lose all your photos from 5 years. Like that really sucks.
mhm.
But there's others as well. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Like a lot of these, sort of like principles that and values that crypto stands for. I'm always sort of questioning how much people actually care. Like
Mhm.
people for a while would just stamp like decentralization on everything, and it's like decentralization doesn't actually like matter in like a lot of cases. To me,
Mhm.
decentralization is a means to an end. So like in the case that we're talking about, why do you want the photos to be like why do you want them to be like sort of hosted by something decentralized rather than or like have them in self custody rather than have them like owned by some and controlled by some centralized like sort of entities because like the centralized entity could pull them if they want, they could get hacked, all of these various things, whereas the self custody is like under your control. And like for some things you don't really care about that, but if you could make
Mhm.
like sort of a self custody backup of your last decade of photos, like and you could just do that like once a year or once a quarter or something, like that would be, and it's like not expensive or whatever, that would be compelling because that removes the risk that you like sort of lose all your photos. And obviously like in the case of money with Bitcoin, it makes a ton of sense. In the case of social media, I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
But there's all these, if like it's like a small video game that I'm playing and like I'm not going to be playing forever, I'm just playing for like a day. I don't really care if it's like decentralized. Like, I just want to play a fun game. Like, I'd much rather play a
Yeah.
centralized fun game than a decentralized, like clunky game that sucks and isn't fun.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like,
It's so true.
I think so. The decentralization is one of those things. I think privacy is another where people like sort of claim
Mhm.
to care about privacy, but really Bitcoin isn't like very conducive to privacy at all. It's like de facto
Mhm.
public, and um, so all these things. Like I'm just not sure how much people actually care, but it sometimes I think takes like the negative experience for people to start to care. And so yeah, like a more widely experienced like severe event could definitely like flip people towards that. Like I think you could argue that like Trump getting um uh
TikTok, Twitter.
yeah, kicked off Twitter and all the other sort of socials in unison was sort of like a red flag that like we didn't immediately all move to decentralized
Mhm.
social overnight, but Farcaster did come about like soon after that. There's other attempts at decentralized social. I think that was at the
Yeah.
very least like sort of a pretty widely seen like warning of like, oh, like if the president can get banned, like so can you. And
Exactly.
do you want to lose all of the content that you've ever put on like these main, outlets on the internet and your following and your ability to reach them? Like, no, you don't. So decentralized social, I think makes sense.
I
So
was
it'll be curious to see what, how much people actually care like over the long run versus like year over year.
That's actually what got me into the blockchain space. I was banned from Facebook,
Oh, wow.
and I couldn't log into my Spotify. Like all these like random like third party apps that like I used to like with the login with Facebook. I would try to go back and log in, and it'd be like your account's banned. So I was like, yeah, basically just ousted from the platform. I got back on. It's not like I was like spewing hate speech. I got in like a beef with like my grandma's old friend, and she reported me.
Oh,
But
man.
yeah,
You got
yeah,
to be
it was
careful with the old ones on Facebook.
exactly. They're brutal. But yeah, no, and then yeah, so I got banned off Facebook for a couple of days, and then I started. My first job was building like a decentralized social media. I would say we're competitors with Farcaster, but we ended up running out of money and all that jazz. So it was kind of like short lived, but it was kind of a cool. So I come from like the info, like decentralized info, less kind of like decent, DeFi. So like the speculative markets are not new to me. Like I did the NFT phase, but like the meme coins, I wasn't around here for the ICO.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, I think there's value in those lessons. But again, like it's just gonna take some time for everyone to kind of come around to it.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good segue. I usually try to get this closer to the top of the episode just to sort of set some context, but would love to just kind of hear your story from, as early as you're willing to start. Obviously, we got sort of
Sure.
like how you got into crypto there, but anything. I always like the early story, even like where you grew up and whatnot, but whatever makes sense or whatever you want to share, just that helps sort of people get a sense for where you're coming from, how you got to where you are, and then obviously we'll spend some time talking about Clanker and whatever else comes up.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I grew up outside of Boston. Went to college on the West Coast in the Bay Area. Did computer science there just because like I was huge into like I knew that I wanted to code. Was kind of got into it through like Minecraft, as a lot of people do, and I guess like a lot of kids, and it was like, oh, this is pretty fun. So I went to school in the Bay Area because I thought I was gonna be like, Silicon Valley was hot. My dream was to be like, oh, I want to go work for Apple, for Facebook, one of the big big names out there. But as I kind of was like studying around it, I kind of like grew kind of this like anti Silicon Valley type feel where it was like this is like the logical next step. That's how you define success. It's going to work for a big prestigious company in Cupertino and get a nice equity and invest, and it just wasn't super exciting to me. I feel like that was just like being another like cog in the machine. And so I kind of like started dabbling around with kind of like startups. I was working with a couple people as like an unpaid intern. One of the guys went to found OpenSea. He was the CTO there. Another guy went to go. He built out the Gemini credit card. But this was like a lot later. I was just like a young pimply kid at the time. But yeah, after college, I jumped into kind of the consulting area and quickly realized that this was not for me. Felt like a hired hitman per se, and so I kind of like jumped back into the startups. I was like, I'm gonna take a risk. Just got banned from Facebook. NFTs were huge. And I saw a post on Twitter about like, this guy. It was it was Nadeem, super smart guy. He worked with he built CryptoCat, which was it's like an encrypted. It was pre-Signal. It's what Edward Snowden used to release the NSA documents to Glenn Greenwald, and so kind of working directly with this guy Nadeem, super brainiac. But I was like the founding engineer for that. Built out this decentralized social media, competed with Farcaster, Lens, all of this, and ended up running out of runway there. So I stuck around kind of the blockchain space, and the next job that I had there was building out certificates of authenticity for like jewelry. Our idea was like, yeah, we're gonna trace the diamonds so people know that they're not blood diamonds, and verify that they're authentic, pieces of jewelry, whatnot. And then kind of no one cared about NFTs, so we pivoted to AI, and I built out it's like an SMS chatbot for like home repair services. Like Sears, they were an early client, and basically you could just like text the robot to make sure that or like the robot would text you be like, hey, what's your washing machine's make, model, serial number, take a picture of it, and all this, so the technician comes and prepared for your appointment or whatever. And
Nothing to do with crypto there, right? Just AI.
no, we
Right.
completely pivoted out of crypto, but that was my first use case of like AI, SaaS AI.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of eventually what prepared me for Clanker. Um, but at the end of the day, it was I wanted to stay in the blockchain. I really like the space. And the AI aspect is very, it's very, you're not building like a custom LLM per se. It's using it to fulfill a tool. But it was super powerful. We found it, and a lot of people loved it. And anyways, yeah, kind of fast forward. I did some stuff with token sales and distributions. Quit my job about 6 months ago. to kind of hack on my own projects. And so I built out a bunch, like a couple different projects. One was a on-chain boat registry, which was kind of my favorite. Built out a nice UI, fully, on chain. I was like trying to pitch it to like harbor masters and these, old people that own boats, and they were like, they just didn't get it. So I completely, working in the wrong industry, and built some other like Farcaster frames. But eventually met one of them was like a GoFundMe on chain aspect where it's like you donate to a cause, and I put on a cause for my cousin's kid, and Proxy Alex, he ended up donating through it, and the idea was to auction off or raffle off a boat cruise on my boat. My brother and I got a boat this summer, refurbished it, all that. And so yeah, he won. I invited him on the boat, and we had a great time. And at the end of it, he's like, "Yeah, like we should hack on something sometime and make some money." And I was like, "Hell yeah, that sounds great," But I was like, this was like August maybe, and so we were kind of building, like I was doing my own side projects. Alex was doing his, proxy swap stuff. And it wasn't until like I was like, I was running low on my savings. And I was like, I need to get a job like quickly. And so, Alex was like, all right, well, like while you're interviewing with these places, like you want to just hack for like a week in person and see what we can build. And we were basically like a couple of days of just working together, and uh we birthed Clanker. And I guess kind of the rest is history. So kind of a weird trajectory, but I feel like we were both kind of like looking for something. And whereas I was building software or apps that had no distribution, and Alex was, he was marketing, these apps, but he didn't have someone technical close by in proximity to like, kind of help build out these processes. And so I think it was just I think it's like, hard work that, we were both kind of preparing for this in our own ways. And then luck, where it's like, it was right after the election, things were looking optimistic for blockchain. So, we were able to kind of take these risks. And yeah, I think it's just, kind of, I never really fully believed in like, just if you keep working, like the meme of like the guy mining for diamonds and then the other guy turns around. It's
Right.
yeah, kind of like that. I feel like that's like a very, accurate kind of representation of everything.
Yeah, you just keep going and eventually something breaks your way. I've heard
Yeah.
this the founder story or the co-founder story behind Clanker from you and from Proxy, and so either it's I trust that it's true, or else you guys are extremely good about getting on the same page. But it's a super cool story. There's like so many elements that are just like kind of random, like you didn't have to build the GoFundMe, he didn't have to donate to it, you didn't have to invite him on the
Yeah,
boat, he didn't have to ask about building together, you guys didn't have to decide to like spend a week in person, like all those like little tiny things that like who knows how close he was to just not even saying anything after the boat
exactly.
ride, and none of this would have happened. So it's always interesting, I think, when stuff like that happens. But I'm curious, rewinding back, I guess however many months from when all that went down, when you decided to quit your job and kind of like venture out on your own to start building stuff for yourself with the boat registry and otherwise, was that like a difficult decision for you? Was it easy? Was it brewing over, years, or
Yeah.
kind of, a sudden
It,
decision, or how'd that go?
it was definitely like a leap of faith, kind of like betting on myself, whereas like I was leaving a job with a guaranteed income. And it like even just like taking time off, I never felt like I was able to kind of like pursue my own ideas or kind of passion projects. And so kind of quitting and just kind of like spontaneously for the summer. Another part of it was like we were building our family cabin in Maine. It burnt down. So I was had my share of manual labor too. But yeah, no, it was definitely like it was a risk, and the market wasn't great at the time too for like any, the crypto market was shit, and the job market wasn't, awesome either. So I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm just gonna bet on myself here and see what happens. Worst case, I'll start applying to jobs in, a couple months when I get low on savings. And it was definitely like this was the first time in my life where like I didn't have like a schedule, but I felt like it was also the time where I was like building the most, getting active in Farcaster and just like exploring other like technologies and figuring out, kind of like what works, what I can get better at. And I realized that I can't do it alone. As a developer, like I can only take it so far, and having a co-founder is, probably one of the most important things. I guess like I don't know, some people probably do it as a solo founder. But for me, like I can't, I don't know how like people that market it, it's a full-time job. So I was over my head. I felt like I wasn't making any traction. Even I felt like I was building a lot of stuff. So that was like I was so down in the dumps, like September, and it's like, oh, like this is going nowhere. I felt like I was at a dead end. I felt like I gave up on, my dreams of like being a, quote unquote founder, because I feel like founder mode is kind of a negative connotation these days. But, like, so I was like, all right, you know what, I'm throwing in the towel. I'm gonna go get a job at a company and, build out whatever they want me to, and, have some stability again. And, I can maybe pick this up later in life if I still want to. So it was definitely, I don't know. Yeah, I'd say. Okay, yeah.
You were like the miner at the end of the
Exactly.
tunnel.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
it's a
I was like,
turnaround. Then Proxy comes knocking.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It was really just that one little strand of dirt left. So, but I think we hit some diamonds. It's been awesome to see people use it. I think what you've been doing with the font wars and designer has been hilarious. And we couldn't have done it if it wasn't for, you know, creatives like yourself.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of cool projects for sure, and it's still like shocking how recent this all came about. Like it's all so new. And so like we
Yeah.
were talking about before, hopefully you get a little time over the holidays to just like catch a break and reset a little bit and go into the new year with, figuring out what's next. But yeah,
Thank you.
it's been a whirlwind. I can't imagine being on in your shoes on all this. It seems like from afar that it's been super crazy and gone fast, but I'm sure in your shoes it's like completely, on steroids version of that. I'm curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
No, I was just gonna say like I'm not used to kind of like anyone using my apps usually, so
ahead.
it's cool. It's cool to see it, taking everything, very, not Alex has been good about like, not taking all the feedback to heart, and kind of like getting thicker skin as it goes. But it's been
Yeah.
great. So I'm super grateful for everything, and all the doors that it's opened and meeting so many people.
So I'm curious, you spent a summer, it sounds like, partly building a cabin, partly working on a boat, and partly building stuff in crypto and the digital world. Is there
Yeah.
anything about those like manual builds, which I think, among the crowds that I'm talking to these days, are less commonplace, that translates over to helping you build in the digital world, or vice versa, or they're pretty distinct and separate?
No, totally. I there was a cut like I was doing the first draft club, and I wrote a couple articles about this, but especially related to like building the house is, I think one of the biggest takeaways is like, you got to have a solid foundation, right? You don't want any like cracks in the architecture, the infrastructure to begin with. So, making sure that like everything is laid out properly, and having a vision of kind of what you want to build is there. I think like maybe an example of this would be, or I guess like another example would be like with the boat, right? Like I bought this boat for like pretty cheap because it was abandoned in a field in Nantucket, and it was like just the engine was pretty old. I put a bunch of money, basically what I paid for the boat, into the engine, and then we ended up just scrapping the engine just because it wasn't worth it to put any more money into.
Mm,
So kind of like related to that, it's like if some things aren't like, if you're not seeing like the returns on like your effort or what you're putting into a contribution, and you're not seeing like that like exponentially get better, I would kind of reevaluate the engine, or something like that, where it's like, or the project that you're working on, to make sure that you're not wasting time or money into dumping more resources into something that's old. Maybe it's out of date, or it's not in style. I think like also, pivoting too is something super valuable, where it's like, like I guess this is not really kind of related to either of like the house or the boat, but it's like I was more like the brute force, like I'm gonna build the best product I can, and then people will come. Like if you build it, people will come. I feel like that was kind of the mentality that I had previous, and I think there's still value to that in some areas, but also it's like like I feel like I was left curving it or right curving it, just like just thinking way too into it, rather than like just having like feelers for the market and being like, this is what's hot right now. Like agents were hot. Like I think it was like Ethernet and Ask Gina were the big bots out there, and we are like, all right, well, this is the current meta. Like let's see what we can do with this. And yeah, I think it's just like building fast, making sure things scale, which is one thing that like with 20,000 plus coins now out, like when I was building this MVP, I was like not expecting this. So I was like building up pagination, as this list was growing, and have it like just basically like taking the most important aspects, like even like the UI is like pretty shit right now still, but like we knew that that wasn't the full product. It was the bot itself that was, the true interface. So not like going crazy, like building out Airbnb style UI for this app, like would have distracted me as the only developer working on it. There's only like so much I can do and prioritize, where it's like basically like outlining like the most important things. And this probably goes to the house building too, where it's like we built this house in 2 weeks. We knew that we had it. Like when I say we, it's like my uncle. He's the contractor, architect, builder. So he's like a pro. I was just kind of the guy that like picks up stuff and puts it, nails in it. But we were crunched for time, and what we did was like we just built like we framed the house, and then basically doing the stuff that we had to do before my uncle went back to Michigan. And similar to this, where it's like we framed Clanker to the point where it was we could get off the ground. We had to be quick. We wanted to be the first to market with this. And then we filled in the walls and did the electrical and all that. And then, with Clanker, we did, the V1 contract, with, self-claiming, and then V2, with all these kind of features. But like iteratively, we made, just because also this market goes so quickly, like what's hot today might not be hot, tomorrow or in the next month. So like just having the ability to like be flexible and pivot, and kind of like read the sentiment of kind of what's going on and what people are using is definitely something that I've learned, and I think it relates to both somehow.
what do you think? That's all those sort of analogies are really interesting. I'm curious, what do you think of during this sort of like fire drill building the original Clanker and then subsequent updates? Are there decisions that you feel, whether it's just sort of you making them on the dev side, or both you and Proxy, or mostly Proxy, whatever sort of the decision weighting might have been? Are there certain decisions that you're like, man, that was like you were just so confident, like this is what's gonna like make or break this, like this is definitely the right decision? And then were there others that were like more iffy, where
Hmm.
you weren't as sure, like whether it was in sort of building that foundation or adding the electrical, so to speak, things that you were less certain about being like sort of the right thing? Like even when you said talk about like being like you want to be first to market, like first to market with what in particular? Because
Hmm.
there's Pump.Fun. It's like very different in certain ways, but also it's at the most general level, like it's a token launcher. So what was like the thing that
Hmm.
was important to be first at, that was like sort of the core thing that you guys were thinking about? And then like just curious about any decisions that come to mind that are might be worth talking about.
Totally. Yeah. So I think the first thing is we did not build Clanker like with the idea of like being a token launcher. The idea, and Proxy might have talked about this last round. I think he did. But it was supposed to be a rogue agent that like goes crazy. We were gonna be like, oh, like we lost the keys and this bot's going crazy, minting new coins. Someone stop it. And that, but like what I did was like what I knew I had to do is just build out like a basic, the webhook that mints a token and then responds with it. And then we were just like, let's just ship this and see what happens. And then, a bunch of people started using it. And then we were like, all right, too many people are using this. Like we need to do some optimization. So we put like the Maynard score and the 1 a day limit. And another thing that was like, ooh, we probably launched too early, but we were just like, this is worth it to get out there and to start out with was like V0 contracts where what happens is like in the back end, like we're minting all these coins and there's we're claiming all the fees and we have to distribute all these fees. And like this was like, ooh, like we got to get a new contract out there very soon to make sure that like everything is like self-service and build the way where it's like we're not custodying just because it wouldn't scale. So
Right.
you were like that was kind of one thing we're like, all right, we know what we have to do here, but at this moment, like we don't have time to like, you know, build out new contracts and things like that. So we kind of had to backfill there. And I think that was like one thing that like looking back, like I don't think like we might not be here if we did redo those contracts, but that was something that we kind of had to like pivot on the way and at least like make sure it was right. But like a lot of eyes were on us. We had to gain the trust of everybody. And so that in itself was like for me, like super stressful being like, all right, we have to like, make sure this goes well. Like our names are on the line, integrity, a lot of risk here, especially with people's funds. Like we don't want to do this. But I think that we handled it pretty well. We're still, making sure that like everything's like backfilled properly and just making sure that like we have like more, documentation, API there for people that want to use it, kind of like building these apps on. It's all kind of like we're building, what do they say? It's like we're building the ladder as we're climbing it or whatever. I don't think that's the right analogy, but whatever that analogy is, that's literally building the airplane as we're flying it. Like that's what
Right.
kind of what we're doing.
The latter actually kind of makes more sense to me, honestly. I've heard the airplane analogy, but that's like, how does that work? Like, how are you even flying in the first place? The ladder, I
Exactly.
can see it. I can see you stacking it up.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's interesting. I mean, it's like it's always hard. You can't, unfortunately, or for better or worse, you can't, run the parallel universe to see what would have happened if you had pocketed the idea for another couple weeks while you worked on,
Mhm.
contracts, even if you had sort of foreseen wanting to have the self-serve piece, like, which it's hard to foresee in the first place, but even if you had, like, would the right move been to have like delay by however many days or weeks to get that out? Like, maybe someone else launches something that's a little different but sufficiently similar to sort of get the same response that Clanker did, and then you don't have any issues in the first place because no one's using it or whatever. And so it's like really hard, I think, to critique anything that
Yeah.
works pretty well, and Clanker certainly worked pretty well, to say the least. And
We
so it's like you're just,
uh,
doing the best you can as you go. I think sounds like the right strategy.
yeah, and we also didn't expect like that many people to use it or be interested in it. We we're actually just kind of we're like, all right, like we're just gonna launch a coin and see what happens. And then I think it was like, yeah, like BFG did one. I was like, oh man, like a lot of people are gonna start using this now. And then yeah, it was definitely like I was definitely like, losing sleep, being like, oh my God, so many people are using this. Then we got a bunch of spam stuff and like just trying to balance all of that and like was yeah, it was a lot. But I mean, yeah, hindsight's 2020. I think that, we're learning as we go. We're both I mean, I'm a first time founder and Alex, we kind of I don't know. I come from startups. Alex, less startups, but I think we're a good balance. And there's just so much like we want to do now and like build out, and we're just trying to like prioritize still like we were at first, where it's like what's going to be the most effective, what's the minimum product we can put out that people will use, and yeah, just kind of break stuff, like kind of like you know fucking around, find out, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, so far so good, it seems for sure. Are there like inflection points looking back? Like it's December 19th as we're recording this. I'm not sure if you remember like what date exactly uh you guys launched Clanker, but couldn't have been more than
What was it?
7, 8 weeks ago. Six,
I
seven, eight
think
weeks ago.
it was either the 8th. I think it was the 8th. Yeah,
Of
because I
November?
November 8th, because I
Right.
remember there's like a I'm looking at my calendar, and we have a legal there's a legal call on the 15th. So so yeah, that was it had to be the 8th. But
Got
yeah,
it.
I think inflection points, let's see.
Like
I
from
think
my
that
perspective from afar, not to interrupt, but just to
yeah.
sort of set a baseline, like I saw like some stuff about Lum, and then like shortly after saw some stuff about Anon, and at the point of Anon, I guess is when I started digging into like what's going on here, like where is this coming from? Saw that it was like launched by a clanker, started seeing a bunch of other clankers come about, and then there's some more from there. But like Anon was kind of the first catalyst that led me to take some more interest in clanker. But I don't know. I'm sure there were seeds before that where you guys were like, "Wow, this is starting to work. Like we need to, you know, get
Yeah.
all hands on deck here."
Totally. Yeah, I think the first one for me was like the Lum, when Ethernet was like, I think because that kind of started the snowball effect, where it was like AI on AI, like buzzword on buzzword, this is crazy. The price went crazy and everyone was like, oh, all about it. I think that was kind of the first like, whoa, we might be onto something here. And then yeah, the Anon, and like seeing not only Anon, but like all these projects, like just starting out, and all these people having like, being able to start products and businesses off was one thing that I was like, oh wow, like it was like, wow, I think we actually just like invented something new here that could be super powerful. And I think, yeah, so like just seeing like all these projects pop up. Another one was like realizing that like a lot of the OGs were not like they're, I think there's a lot of like negative sentiment around meme coins, which I totally understand. I think that like understanding from the point where it's like, it's not everyone's cup of tea, and making everyone happy is super hard. And I feel like kind of just like, making sure that like to the best of our ability, we're able to navigate this in a respectful way that, makes sure that no one, at least minimizing the ability for everyone to like, I don't know, get hurt or make people mad, or we always trying to do the right thing, ethics first. I think there's been a lot of like, not controversy, but like stories that have started out of this. And I think that like, what we wanted to do is just really like put something out there, and then like everyone started building their own things, which is great. I think it's awesome that, like the ZK tech behind it is worked, but I know that like, a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but a lot of the like some people that are very respected in the space, and I respect them, don't see meme coins in the same way. But I think that was kind of just like navigating kind of the politics of it was very, like a something that we've had to kind of deal with. But just making sure that like we're all in it together. We're all trying to grow the ecosystem, and just like making sure that like I think another thing is like having dealing with the spam and making sure that like these accounts that are trying to profit off someone's projects or personality, mitigating that so traders aren't basically scammed through it or think that they're buying something that they're not, has been definitely something that we're trying to balance. Again, like it's I think it's like a double-edged sword where it's great that all these projects are blossoming, and I think that's the true beauty of it. Like a lot of people have launched clankers that have like changed their personal lives and things like that. I think it's super cool to see all that. But yeah, I think that like it's with all this, it just comes with great responsibility, and we're working through it. I know that we're not perfect, but we're trying to do it is in the best way that benefits the ecosystem, and yeah, just pushes innovation. And I think like really what happened was just like we're messing around, and this I think that we have a lot more planned, and we're going to continue to kind of see what's possible and push the boundaries of innovation. And that's the fun part, that like this doesn't even feel like a job or anything. It just feels like a fun extension of my summer, just hacking on random things. So definitely a little bit more stressful in the sense, but what, like that's life. And I think it's learning as I go, and yeah, just super grateful and thankful.
Yeah, I mean, best you can do is best you can do, and I think so far, from my perspective, I'm sure you have to deal with all the you know every piece of feedback and haters and whatever. Not that you have to deal with it, but you're naturally going to see it all, or a lot of it at
Totally.
least. And
Yeah.
from my perspective, like pretty far, a lot further removed from the situation. It's like most of what I see is positivity and respect. And if you're not into meme coins, that's fine. I'm not even particularly into meme coins. I just, I thought it was kind of cool and interesting and it's fun. And so it's like, as long as, like you said, you don't do anything, you know, with bad intentions or whatever, you do the best you can and try to do the right thing, then like, people, if you're dabbling with meme coins, or especially if you're doing more than dabbling with meme coins and putting like significant sums of money into it, that's kind of, for my, you should know the responsibilities that you're sort of taking
Yeah,
on with that, and that it's extremely speculative and all this stuff can go to zero at any time. I
totally.
personally still look at Bitcoin and Ethereum. Maybe those are the only two to some degree that have crossed the threshold where it's more difficult to see them like going to, not like literally
Hmm.
zero, but Bitcoin
Yeah.
going under 10K or Ethereum going under 500, or like these sort of, practical zero amounts. Like it's up until maybe like within the last year, it's like, the most like sort of the highest risk scenario to me for the last few years, um, up until, this election, arguably the ETFs, was the
Hmm.
US. It wasn't hard to foresee a situation in which the US sort of, whether suddenly or gradually, takes on like an extremely harsh, uh, set of policies and regulations against crypto, whether it's, seizures or exchange closures or freezing
Hmm.
assets, whatever it might be. Like they do something like that. And then like a lot of the world, like there's very few countries in the world that like want to make enemies of the US. Like obviously there's a few that are going to do their own thing, like a Russia or a China or whatever. But for the most part, like countries are pretty willing to like do what America wants, for
Hmm.
better or worse. And so like if the U.S. took this super harsh stance, then like a bunch of other countries could have followed suit. And like, yeah, you can't like take Bitcoin down, but if it's blacklisted in 80% of countries around the world and 95% of like, you know, like meaningful, you know, capital around the world, then like its upside is more along the lines of this like sort of sketchy thing. Like you can't act, like you need to be able to mainstream something in like somewhat of a legal way for it to have the
Yeah.
upside that people are talking about of, you know, the market cap of gold or whatever. So anyway, like up until really, I would say the election, but maybe before that, like the ETFs, where it's like pretty hard to like
Hmm.
piss off BlackRock and like all of the
Yeah.
endowments and like pension funds that invest in BlackRock. So at that point, that was like a pretty big milestone. But certainly with the election and having the idea that we're going to have 4 years of generally pro crypto government, and that would be pretty hard to reverse probably. It's like those
Totally.
two things feel the least risky to go to zero as they ever had, you know, knock on wood. But everything beyond that, it's like even you take a Solana or you take some of these. I mean, we have,
Hmm.
you know, coins in the top 10 market cap or whatever that most people consider like default dead, and yet they have these massive, you know, market caps well beyond anything, you know, in Clanker or most things in the meme coin space outside of like Dogecoin or whatever. And like all these things, people kind of assume they're going to go to zero, like, you know, Litecoin or whatever.
Yeah.
And like they're still riding high. So anyway, it's like it's a super risky space. I think anyone who's playing around in it should kind of know that. And especially if you're playing around with big sums of money, and that's not like in absolute terms, but just in relative terms for what's big for you personally. It's like you have to
Totally.
have some ownership over that risk. It's not like, again, if a platform does something that's malicious, then that's a different story. But it's like, as long as they're just kind of doing what they're doing and they're pretty upfront about it, then it's like, kind of is what it is.
Yeah. The
So
trenches are they're trenches are dangerous, but I feel like if you're gonna be in the trenches, you know that bullets are flying. But
exactly, got to be aware.
yeah, yeah, no, I will say like when BTC was at like what 30K like this year, I was like, damn, I chose the wrong industry. Like I gotta pivot. But
Yeah,
yeah,
well, the
no,
company you were a part of at the time went just they went from what it was NFT certificates on jewelry
yeah,
to you know, laundry machine
AI.
AI for lack of a better
Yeah.
word. So it's like pretty
Yeah.
big pivot.
AI
But
was
had you not got the laundry machine AI training, you know, Clanker might not exist. So all these things
exactly.
happen for a
Yeah.
reason.
Everything happens for a reason. I'm trying to like remember that like not everything's as good as it seems and not everything's as bad as it seems. I'm trying to like stay level headed as as we kind of go across this. But yeah, no, super excited to be in the intersection right now.
Awesome. Well, I know we're coming up on the scheduled time, but it's been an awesome conversation. Hopefully we can have more in the future, and looking forward to seeing what's next for Clanker, what's next for you, and we'll be watching and rooting from the sidelines.
Awesome. Glad to be here with you today and yeah, had a bunch of fun just shooting the shit. I'd love to come on whenever. So yeah, thanks
Awesome.
for having me.
All
All
right.
right.
Thanks, Jack, and
Talk
Merry
to you.
Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Merry Christmas.
All
Happy
right.
New Year. See ya.
Bye
Bye.
bye.